And we are being streamed. There'll be a little bit of a delay, but I see us. That is wonderful.
It's such a great sign.
It's such a great sign. And I just want to turn myself off in at least one of two places.
Oh,
I know. I
bit
know.
interesting. Why not add a few more?
I know. I'm
Is
gonna,
there a link that I can post for people?
yeah,
Wonderful.
that should be right here in the chat.
Oh, marvelous.
And then we'll stick that over here and I'll let other people talk, like Maria maybe,
Yeah.
Mhm.
as we're waiting to gather peeps.
Should we jump in?
I think we could probably jump right in and then people can always rewind.
Mhm.
Um,
Great.
yeah,
Well, in that
let's do
case,
that.
I will welcome everyone for joining in to the post etiquette premiere chat with some of the principals of this production, of this really rich, unique intersection of three consequential historical figures in a very jam-packed 20-ish minute short. My name is Maria Murphy. It's really my pleasure to facilitate this conversation tonight. And folks listening in on YouTube are welcome to post questions in the chat. We'll be sure to get to them. Maybe we can begin first by asking everyone to introduce themselves and share their role in the project. I'm not sure the order that makes sense, maybe text to music to production. So maybe John, we'll start with you if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm
Role
John
in the
Thoreau,
project.
and yeah, John Thoreau and Monica and I sat in Trinity Square in Toronto one late spring day, I think, about 11 or 12 years ago. And she said, "What do you think?" And I thought, why not? I'd never written an opera libretto before and produced something for Monica, which probably had enough words in it to do the ring cycle. And and Monica turned it into something much more elegant and workable, and it was beautiful.
Great. Well, let's move on to Monica.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I was actually pulling up the email exchange we had about this yesterday because I was remembering it. Yeah, so I'm Monica. I'm the composer of Etiquette.
Great. And Lucy.
Hello. I was happy to be playing the role of Nancy Astor. It was really fun work to learn and dig into who Nancy Astor was and um, play with Aaron. It was a great fun to do the duet with Aaron. And I really enjoyed the music. I enjoyed the whole experience with Essential Opera with Maureen and Aaron and everybody that was involved. It was a lovely experience.
Aaron, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you for that, Lucy. I loved singing it with you as well. Um, this opera has been so close to my heart. I'm Erin Bardua. I'm co-artistic director of Essential Opera. And it is just, it's such a cliche to say I'm thrilled, but I'm so thrilled that we've now premiered this film. I'm so proud of it. Is it okay to say that? I'm saying it. And so thrilled to and just lucky to have been part of this. So thank you, Monica. Thank you, John. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody.
Maureen?
Yeah, I'm Maureen Batt. I am the other co-artistic director, and I played Dorothy Parker in this beautiful opera. And I'm sure there's lots of things we're going to talk about. And yeah, cliche as it may be, we are we are very thrilled. It's really fun to come back to this in this way.
And Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Belding. I'm the director of this, and yeah, that was just so fun to watch live. It's kind of nice to see it again since we shot it.
Great. Well, this is actually, I didn't realize that this was a production in some ways almost 10 years in the making. So I'd love to hear, I guess, take us back to 2013. John, you alluded a little bit to Monica approaching you about this topic. I'm kind of curious about how these three figures were chosen. Was that the initial idea? Um, when did Essential Opera come into the mix? Would love to hear a little bit more about the genesis of the project.
Monica, I suspect if you've been looking at our conversations in email that you might have a fresher sense of exactly how we did this.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So Essential Opera had approached me to write an opera for a triple bill, which was happening in 2014, of one acts. And I was trying to think of, something that could be really interesting. And they were also like, it's really a lot easier for us to get sopranos than men. So if you could write something like a women centric, that would be great, at the time at least. And so I'm not quite sure why kind of Emily Post and Dorothy Parker kind of like came up, but I wrote John, and I had known him through his music review kind of journalism capacity. And I wrote him and I was like, hey, I have this sort of crazy idea of a libretto that's like 1920s, Dorothy Parker, Emily Post. Is that something that you would be interested in doing? And I think, initially he was kind of like, I did something back in the day, and it was my first and last time as a librettist, but then I think I twisted his arm, and then he wrote something very, very interesting after that.
Yeah, I remember picking up every single book I could find about Emily Post and her circle and the sort of the influential people around her at the time. And I spent a lot of time reading. I just sort of immersed myself in this culture, these people, the times. And this is what came out. I mean, I haven't worked as a journalist since 2014, really. And I'm a chaplain now, and I sort of deal with spiritual issues all the time. And I couldn't help but sort of watch this video and think, wow, it was already there. How these things just sort of bubble up sometimes.
Yeah, the 1920s setting is so immediately present in the film. Also, the music, Monica, you had mentioned that you're sort of inspired by Paul Whiteman, a sort of early 20th century band composer. And I really heard Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue with that opening sort of clarinet line. And with the costumes and kind of the just thinking about the political context of that time, the Roaring Twenties, sort of the aftermath of some of the initial reverberations of the suffragist movement. It's a really just a really dense and complicated time to be representing these three diverse characters in terms of their political leanings and the work that they were doing. Um, and I'd love to ask a couple of questions about character development, especially thinking about the relationship between the libretto and the music, because the character development of these three contrasting figures takes shape musically so economically also through the libretto. It's such a short work. It is such a heavy lift to create such rounded characters with such limited text and music. So I'd love to hear about that dynamic and figuring out how do you present characters that come fully formed to the audience in such a concise way.
I think this really was Monica's doing because I really did send in way too many words, which is a totally typical young or inexperienced librettist's mistake. And so Monica, I mean, you really did pick out sort of the essence of what needed to be said or sung. And since you had the musical tools at your fingertips, I mean, you kind of made that. I mean, you wove it together with your music, really.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's so much, there was such like a richness in the text, but like, and like quotes from different things and everything. Um, and it's strange because when I think about when I think about this work, I think of it as like not, I think if it's sort of with like a lightness, like because maybe because of the opening or because the 1920s vibe or whatever, but experiencing it and revisiting it, like there's quite a lot. You go through something, with each of the characters in, as you say, Maria, in such a short amount of time. Because I think with Dorothy Parker, she's kind of like, having her like rebelling against what, and rebelling against what is expected and rules, and, putting her kind of satire and humor into it. And with Nancy and Emily, they kind of are like their own individuals, and there's commonality, but then there's also disagreement. And they are really like kind of touch and go on a lot of things throughout the duet, where they're like, oh, are we going to go there? Oh, maybe we're going to back away from that. And that, there's very much a kind of push pull with those two characters, which I thought was really interesting to set.
Maybe going back, Monica, to your point about women-centric opera, unfortunately rare, although increasingly less rare, it's still not that frequent that you see an opera with all female characters. And maybe at the risk of oversimplifying a huge body of work, I couldn't help but think about, being an undergrad student in music history, thinking about like first encountering Catherine Clement's work, Opera or the Undoing of Women, right, which is a book from the 70s, I think, that is basically saying women in opera are typically the plot is driven by their sexual assault or their murder, or they will find a way to die in some capacity. And, embarrassingly, this book remains a very relevant text within opera production, even in this contemporary context. But I wanted to ask about, just taking this approach, Maureen and Aaron, if you want to jump in and also thinking about this through the lens of production, but also certainly for Monica and John to think about, about creating a work that is centered on these three women and not glazing over the nuances of the issues and the complications that they bring to their roles, but also not focusing on how they might die.
Aaron, do you want to start?
Sure. You've been undone. Yes, I was just reeling, being reminded that that book is from the 70s, and that I feel like we still have to sort of walk people toward this point of, if you look at the top 20 most produced operas in the world, it's still a list that sort of sounds like a Henry VIII rhyme. It's, dead, killed, dead, assaulted, assaulted then killed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the occasional one who is, all of those things happen because they're a sex worker. And so then we all also get to talk about that whole stigma. And it's a nightmare. And as producers, we kind of made, I think, an unspoken rule right from the beginning. We're just not going to do that. There's plenty of that. So to me, that's sort of the main thing. Of course, some basic, especially in our early days, casting considerations, budget considerations come into play. We are not going to be able to put on 10 Helden tenors the opera. And that still remains true, actually. But so that was part of why we asked Monica to write this piece for these upper voices that were more available to us, that are the people who don't get as much work. Just definitionally, most of the leading roles in operas are still for lowered voices. So that's part of that for sure. But it really feels different to work on a piece where even though, as you say, it doesn't gloss over the fact that these women, because they are real women who lived in our real world, they experienced abuse, they experienced all sorts of terrible things. It doesn't gloss that over. It's just that it's not being done in order to propel a male character's journey. They're not, to use a comic book term, they're not fridged. No one's in the fridge waiting to be rescued, which is kind of cool. They're just living their lives and propelling their own stories.
Yeah, and we've always been interested in um, relationships, being able to showcase relationships. We've used this word rich already tonight, richness in these conversations, and the music and the libretto just, I mean, I don't want to say it makes it easy, but it makes it easy. You know, when we received that score and coming back to it after a number of years, I mean, it's a lot, I think, what people say about Mozart. If you're looking for any clues, you know, it's in the music, and it's in the text, and it's in the relationship between the music and the text. And so we have that layer here in etiquette. It's very it's at our fingertips. And so there's that relationship, as we've been talking about, between the music and the text, but then among all three of us. And it's interesting, like Dorothy is only in scene 1 and scene 3, so she's alone, but it doesn't feel like that. It took me a while to, and I'm gonna maybe I shouldn't admit this, but it took me a while to remember or realize or put together that both Dorothy and Emily are writers. I know that's ridiculous. I know it's so silly, but in the context of what we're looking at in these three scenes, Dorothy's like the writer in that moment because she's writing. And it took me a moment. I can't remember when it occurred to me. I'm like, wait, we're both writers.
I love this, but I also, not to put thoughts into the head of a real historical person, but I can't help but feel a little bit like at least the Dorothy that you play in this opera, this fictionalized Dorothy, maybe also feels that way. I feel like in this version of Dorothy's head, she's the real writer,
Sure.
right? She's being very writerly.
Mm.
And I think there's some dismissal of this kind of practical manual of behavior. She doesn't see the use of it, so it's garbage. Anyway, I feel like that's a little bit of that confusion, the genesis of that maybe, because I feel like that's this version of Dorothy's attitude anyway.
Let's absolutely go with that, Aaron. I like that very much. But it is it once you get into it and you really feel the connection between the scenes, um, even though we don't see them all together at the same time.
Monica or John, I don't know if you wanted to jump in and also offer any perspective on that. No pressure, but just if you wanted to add anything else.
Well, what struck me in sort of revisiting this after what seems to be, such a long time, is that this all got put together way before the Me Too movement, and so much of that is actually present in the issues. I think part of what drew me to this whole project was the fact that 100 years after women get suffrage, 100 years after these women are talking to each other and trying to achieve something in the world, so many of these issues are still so present with us, and it's kind of crazy. I thought it was really nice to be able to go back and hear these early voices and hear some of their bravery of just going out into a world that was not a woman's world by any means, and to be able to actually tell people about a better way to live. I mean, politically or through etiquette. Um, anyway.
Yeah, I'll add to just that when I first watched the film, when the sort of apparitions of the of these, like, 1920s, men kind of show up. I mean, I gasped. I was just like, I was not expecting that. And also what I loved about it too was that, there's like a two-dimensional aspect to this that, like, is so perfect, of like Dorothy's kind of looking at it as like, these are not real, and I'm showing that they're not real. So I don't know if, like, Tom, if that was your kind of vision behind it, or what, but I loved it.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think I feel like you're spot on with that. I mean, I think we approach that sequence in a few different ways, and I think Maureen and Aaron and I went back and forth whether that was going to be, we fill the space with with extras and all this kind of thing, but I think it started to make more sense to do that sort of um, yeah, it almost makes it a little bit more like this fantasy in her mind or something like that. So yeah.
One of my favorite lines is when Dorothy is speaking about like the ultimate dullness of etiquette. And it just, I mean, it just, the knife twist, like it's a really good, powerful line. And I just absolutely really appreciated how the contrast, of Parker, who, from it seems to me, what at least what I'm aware of, was a bit of a leftist, had been publicly labeled as a communist, which of course like removed her from a lot of working opportunities. And then you have someone like Post, whose, pedigree is affluence and went to finishing school and is in part basically talking about best practices to make sure that safe topics are used in conversation to ultimately avoid anything that could be perceived as political, and that dynamic is just so engaging. And I think again the brevity and how well it's presented so concisely makes that contrast, that friction, even more um strong, even stronger. And I think, and maybe Lucy, this might be a question for you because, then we have yet another dimension with the conversation between Emily and Nancy, which is clearly showing, at least alluding to more systemic issues. But quickly they reorient that conversation back to etiquette, and specifically like the conversation around what constitutes a gentleman. But Nancy kind of points out a little bit about this dynamic, and it's short, but it's really powerful. So Lucy, I don't know if you'd like to kind of offer your motivate, how you were thinking about the character's motivation in some of those more like declarative statements that Nancy offers.
Um, so I did a little bit of reading about Nancy Astor, and I learned that she was somebody that not everybody liked in her life, but she had very strong opinions and was very witty in conversation with people. Um, she she was one of the one of the women who was at the head of the suffragettes movement. So she advocated for women's rights. She was building nurseries. She was also part of the temperance movement. She was very much against alcohol, which is perhaps not what how Dorothy Parker felt about it, or so she's coming from a different point of view. I don't think she has a very good opinion of men, based on some of the things that she's saying in the text, and I think that she's very quick to judge, and quick to feel that her opinion is correct. So that those are some of the things that I was thinking about when I was portraying her.
This
I'm
might be
going
a
to
good.
jump in and
Oh,
totally agree. Sorry, Maria. Oh, and just say I so love that scene between Nancy and Emily because this opera could absolutely just be a comparison between, Dorothy on the left, the people's writer, and these two rich ladies who are both full of garbage. But there's also something very different about the two rich ladies, where Emily Post, absolutely, just the most privileged human being you can imagine. No, I'm never going to argue that at all for one moment. Pedigree, etc., all of that great stuff. For sure, for sure, for sure. At the same time, she wrote this book that was not for privileged people. It was for middle class people. And so some of that stuff about, stick to safe topics, it's all about don't let anybody kick you out of where you deserve to be based on not having known the unspoken rules. I'm going to speak them all, which I think quite a few people didn't approve of her doing. It's like those are our secrets. This is how we make sure that people feel uncomfortable and don't come back to the club. How are we supposed to know who's good people if they all know which fork to use? How are we supposed to tell the difference? It's almost like you're turning them all into just humans like us. And she was like, right? One of my favorite scenes in her book, where she wrote this series of magazine articles when she drove across the country with her son in 1915, before there was an actual highway to drive on in most places. But they were like, we're going to go for it in their ridiculous imported Mercedes, and trying to get it fixed in little towns in the Midwest. Absolutely absurd. But one of my favorite scenes was when she and her son and their lady friend, who had accompanied them, who's never named, wanted lunch. And so they went into a tavern in a little town, and it was the type of place where there was the main room and only men were allowed in there. And there was nowhere that women were allowed to be in this tavern and eat a sandwich. And so they kind of just kicked the men out. They were like, well, so this is a sex segregated space. We understand that. And we are going to be eating turkey sandwiches here. So do with that information what you will. And everyone had to leave. Just her, oh, you want to outgroup somebody? No, we're in-grouping them. And I just love that about her so much. I came to love Emily Post through this opera, having known nothing about her priorly. And I just want to thank both of you for that wonderful addition to my life. As I sit here in her own drawing room, I'm just having a great time thinking about Emily Post.
One of the things that has stuck with me about all the research that I did was that young women of a certain class in that time, their instrument of choice at home was one that we would never, ever, ever guess to be present in a nice Victorian or post-Victorian drawing room. It was the banjo. They all knew how to play the banjo. There's a whole opera there, I think, for some other project.
Honestly, Monica, missed opportunity with lack of banjo, just for the sequel. Next one. Yeah.
Blame the commissioners. We did not request banjo in the instrumentation.
I know. And Erin, thank you so much for providing that kind of nuanced context about, how to think of Post's work and, the larger corpus of her work and the social context in which it emerged. Now is maybe a good time to take a question from the audience. John G is wondering about how women from that era, who he met as a young man, might feel about these issues. So how might we imagine Annie Maxton, other early suffragists, how we might think about what they would be reacting about some of these issues? I'm not sure who might like to take the first stab at that.
I mean, I'll jump in and say a couple of things, but not much because it's not my area. But I think that the issue of what I think later came to be known as a champagne socialist is an issue that really plagued the suffrage movements, because mostly they were privileged women. And certainly in the case of somebody like Nancy Astor, and I actually don't remember what Emily Post's thoughts on suffrage were. She may not have felt she needed the vote, but I don't know if she was one of those or not. But it really wasn't a movement that was in any way what we would now think of as intersectional. And so it's hard to say how some of those specific women might have reacted to a Dorothy Parker criticizing the concept of etiquette, or to an Emily Post making it more publicly known, or even how they would have felt about somebody like Nancy Astor taking the idea of women's suffrage so far as to actually hold an office. I feel like that is one of those things that at the time was certainly seen as rather a step too far. And if you think about how many women we have in top leadership positions even now, it kind of is still seen as a step too far. Go ahead and vote, but don't come to the meetings. That's all I've got on that.
Maybe we can turn a little bit to thinking about the medium, the production. It seems to me, and Maureen and Erin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you've been doing a lot of these filmed operas, and at least in part, I think probably motivated by the onset of the COVID pandemic, but something, that I imagine that you'll continue to pursue now and in the future. And it seems to me like out of that necessity that a lot of other avenues have opened up through this medium, perhaps, around questions of accessibility, not just in the production, of course, and, taking appropriate precautions in the filming, but also just sort of what it means to have filmed versions of operas available and accessible.
I mean, absolutely the motivation for our, is this our third? This is our third short opera film, my fourth short opera film. Three of those are Monica Pierce works. um, of course, that was a 2020. I don't want to say pivot, but it just happened. But here we are, and it feels really special to have spent time creating the work this way. It's certainly not something I ever thought that we were going to be getting into in this way. And I also feel like, um, if I can simply just say this flat out, having Tom Belding, who happens to be my brother-in-law in my life, made that decision a little more simple, to come to, knowing that I had a mentor and somebody to be there by my side through many of these projects over the past few years. And there's a depth that we get to experience as the artistic directors, as the producers, and of course in the roles, but there's a depth that, it's not that there isn't a depth and richness that I'm experiencing when I'm performing otherwise, but this is a new, perhaps no longer brand new, but newish territory for us. And it's been really cool to be revisiting works, if there are works we've already done, but then also some of the newer ones that we've done as well. It's really been a privilege to work in this way and to be thinking about how we can achieve these productions with all kinds of just varying budgets, very, very, very tiny budgets, starting with our Mirror back in 2020. This was our largest budget, but by no stretch of the imagination is it a large budget when we talk about film production. Tom, you can attest to that. But I have completely forgotten what the original question was. And I'm very, very happy that we have these films. I love that they're out. Oh, we were talking about accessibility, which is something that we are very excited about, getting to re-perform works. We love commissioning, we love premiering, but then getting to actually do them again. And when we have a commercial recording available, like we do with the EP of Etiquette, and have these beautiful film products to be able to show places and stream and screen, and it's just really cool. I still feel like I'm kind of like over here and it's happening like to us.
I can assure you, you have been involved in the process.
Hi.
I have the Google Docs and the emails to prove it. It's part of our mandate to try to bring works that are more contemporaneously written, works by composers from traditionally excluded groups, to the canon. And one of the ways that that happens is when people are looking for a show to produce, they can find a recording that they can share with their cast members. They can find a video to give them some ideas about interpretation. There's more than just scores that are sitting there silently on a shelf. And so the wonderful opportunity we have had to record and film some of these works is a huge part of that, and something that the film part is something we didn't really initially look for. And as you said, Maria, the pandemic occurred, and with the start of that, and as Maureen under protest said, pivoting occurred, it has just become a part of what we do, and we're really, really loving it. And yes, having access to gorgeous people like Tom, who are so talented in specific areas where we know nothing, has made it possible in a way it wouldn't have been before.
Tom,
Thank
I'd love
you. Yeah. No, I was just going to say thank you for that. No, I mean, it's been great to collaborate on these. And in fact, like I think when you initially asked me about this one, I think I remember specifically feeling a little bit nervous and sort of like, okay, I'm kind of like, I don't know, this is an opera it's based on, real history here. And I felt that kind of nervousness, which I think is actually a good thing. And I think that it's a nice boost when you feel that. And I think I remember going and listening to the music and then I think I started to transcribe the music and the text and writing out all the text. And I think Maureen, you messaged me and said like, "Oh, there's a copy of the libretto. I can just send you that. You don't need to transcribe while listening." Um, so I remember doing that, and I was like, "Okay." And then it was interesting to sort of take that and put it to a script and write out a script to kind of what my interpretation was. And I think Aaron and Maureen were great at just going with these ideas that I had. And I know you've performed, the opera live, and there was a certain maybe way it was done before, but I think to put it to screen, it was a very interesting process. It was a lot of fun.
There's a question in the chat about just kind of the order of libretto and writing music, and Stacy is asking about that challenge and negotiating that, and is wondering if there's any back and forth, like making changes when you actually get to rehearse it together. So maybe I will leave that to John and Monica. And Monica, I know you also, in some of your other works, also are the librettist too, so that might be an interesting dynamic to share.
Yeah, I want to say that I think initially John sent me, sent me two scenes, two of the three, I think. And I may be misremembering this, but I think we spoke about having like a bookend with Dorothy Parker. So I remember working through the text and kind of at first kind of going like, do you mind if I like take this part out and this part, just to kind of condense it because of the time kind of considerations. And at first we were kind of going back and forth. And then I think at a certain point, John was like, you know what, you got this. You can just like go for it. But everything was his text. I just kind of took out like little bits here and there. And then once that was kind of finalized, then I started writing. And then I don't think we really, collaborated too much until we got into the kind of like rehearsal process. John, am I misremembering that? I feel like that's my experience, I think.
No, you're remembering right. And by the time that you asked for the bookend, you had already kind of showed me how there were too many words. And so I actually had the hardest time writing the third scene because I was like, okay, can I censor myself enough to save you the bother of doing it? Um, but yeah, that's exactly the way you described it. I felt like it was a very smooth process. I mean, maybe it helps that, I'd worked for a newspaper for so long that, I was used to an editor taking my copy and just sort of doing whatever they thought was appropriate to it. Not feeling like every word belonged to me somehow.
That's a really interesting point that I hadn't really thought of before, John. But of course, that permission was sort of there, perhaps even before you or as you were discussing that. Stacy, to your question, depending on the work, sometimes there's a back and forth in terms of when you get into the rehearsal process. Um, there can be workshops where the composer and the librettist are there, and if a line isn't working, either because a singer, their instrument wants it to be a different way, there might be a discussion about, oh, can we sing this word this way, or could this note change or something here, can we have another spot for a breath or something. Like those types of changes can happen in the rehearsal process. But this is one of the earlier works that we commissioned, so it was a pretty tight budget. We actually had a GoFundMe, I think, was our main source of income for these commissions, for the triple bill, so not just for this work but for all three, with Chris Thornborough and Alicia Denberg, Monica Pierce. That was the triple bill. And when you get to the point of our rehearsals, there's not necessarily a lot of time to make those changes either. So it's really if something's not working. And a lot of composers will send you, when they've sent you a score and you're preparing, that can happen over email or in a conversation before the actual rehearsal room if there's something that needs to be looked at. But with Monica in particular, we are very lucky when we receive a score there's really not much to. I mean, I have asked for things. I've asked for a few things in the many works. A little note here, a little word there, but we're pretty lucky.
It's probably because I sing it at the piano. So I'm like, if I can do it in a breath, they can definitely do it in a breath.
I had one final thought, and I'll keep double checking to make sure there's no other questions in the chat. But it occurred to me, just thinking about how long Essential Opera has been around, and I think I was double checking with Maureen about the years that Essential Opera was formed in 2010, and I think you mentioned 2011 was your first official production. Was it Figaro? I also was trying to remember that. It's Figaro. Okay. So at that point, at least from my perspective, it seemed that Essential Opera was really trailblazing what is sometimes referred to as indie opera, in terms of smaller independent opera companies that, can offer a different array of specialties, more intimate productions, maybe a focus on new works or, other niche or specialized unique parameters. And now that you're 14 years on, and there's a lot of other and a lot more independent opera companies out there doing really incredible work, how has the landscape shifted for indie opera, if that's even a term that you would use? Maybe there's a different way that you would describe what you're doing or the genre of kind of process that you pursue, however you might like to respond.
Sure, I'm going to unmute, but that's not because I think I have the definitive answers, Maureen. So please interrupt me, or you're the host. You could just force mute me if you wanted. I just in case, are we on a delay here? I think that we still embrace the indie opera label. There are very few major opera companies in Canada. It's not even one per major city. So the divide is really huge between has big budget, corporate sponsors, charitable status, a few rich people providing lots of big donations, that kind of thing. We really don't have any of that. So we're still very small scale. And I don't think that that's detrimental. It's just a fact of how we operate. We operate in the microcosm a lot of the time. And I kind of think we love that. If somebody backed up a truck of money to Maureen's door, just go check if you don't mind. I don't think we'd say no. I think we would put on Aida with elephants, but it would still have to come down to we would still be boiling it down to what are the relationships between these human beings? What is relatable and interesting about this? What scratches that empathy itch, what's interesting about this now, or we probably wouldn't do it, because the answer can't be elephants. Is that anything, Maureen? Please help.
We do usually, every time we have an interview or talk, elephants do come up.
This is probably my fault.
So I do think that is the correct response. And there's something to your point that it's not detrimental to be an indie opera company. We kind of get to sit and dream about what we want to do. And we don't have to, we have to find money, we have to write 8 million grants and maybe then write them all again and then maybe again. But we get to be making the art that we want to be making and call the shots the way we're calling the shots, and get to be like, wait, let's just make some films now, I guess.
Apparently we're just going to make some films. We both forgot to go to film school, but we have Tom.
But Tom did teach us one time for an hour before we shot our own mirror footage back in 2020. Right. Yeah, that full lesson. Yeah.
There's a competition going on in the chat to see who can type the elephant emoji fastest, I believe. Emily Jewer, who did some graphic design work on the magazine covers for the film, has won that contest. So congratulations to Emily.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Maureen, Aaron, is there something coming down the pike that we should mention quickly?
Oh boy.
It's a lot going on, but is there anything immediate that this audience should be alerted to?
It's a busy spring for
Absolutely.
Essential Opera. We have this film is up until April 3rd. So if you loved it for the premiere or you missed the premiere and you're watching this discussion after the fact, your ticket is good until April 3rd. And then we have a chamber music concert coming up in the music room in Halifax.
That is on April 24th, which is a Wednesday, and it is also live streamed. So that will be live streamed at the event time only. So make sure you get
Right.
your tickets in advance. And then we just showcased at Juno Fest here in Halifax, and we're going to be showcasing in Charlottetown for the ECMAs because Monica is nominated for Classical Composer of the Year for Etiquette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're celebrating that nomination and we're going to be singing a little bit of etiquette and a few other things as well at that showcase.
Well, stay tuned. I'm sure there'll be even more very soon.
Can't stop, won't stop.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. It was so fun to see you. Okay. I'm going to definitely know how to end this live in this moment.
I would
It's
leave,
like-
but it's more fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do it. I'm going to do it now. Here it
Would you
is.
like me to look up in etiquette how to do this?
I
End
would
your live
want.
stream?
Yeah.
I have it here just in case.
Quick look up live stream in the index.
There's like telephone etiquette. Maybe there's
Oh,
like,
so close.
yeah, I know. Maybe there's like
This is delightful. I am going to click